So there I was, floating in the observation deck of the Coalition's flagship Verity's Edge, watching the humans do what humans do best. Something absolutely ridiculous that somehow works. You have to understand, I've been a xenosociologist for the collective for approximately 300 cycles, and I thought I'd seen everything. Methane breathers who communicate through bioluminescent poetry, silicon-based entities who reproduce by nuclear fission, even those absolutely unhinged Kretok who consider warfare a form of interpretive dance. But humans are different, and not in the good, predictable way you want your sentient species to be different. This particular story starts with Lieutenant Kae'vira of the Ssythian Imperium, and let me tell you, if you've never met a Ssythian, count yourself fortunate. They're a proud people, too proud really, with skin that shifts colors based on emotional states, which makes lying to them an absolute nightmare at diplomatic functions. Kae'vira was what you'd call striking, even by Scythian standards. Tall, lithe, with scales that normally shimmered in gradients of deep violet and midnight blue. Emphasis on normally, because when I first encountered her, those scales were locked in a dull, sickly gray that meant only one thing to anyone who knew Scythian physiology. She was terrified. Now, fear isn't uncommon in a military setting. You understand. We were 3 weeks into the Zalnoth incursion, and those those mineral-based nightmares had been pushing through our defensive perimeter like it was made of decorative tissue paper. But Kae'vira's fear wasn't about the enemy. It was about something far more personal, far more insidious. She had what the humans call haphephobia, except magnified by about 1,000% due to Scythian neural sensitivity. Any physical contact, even the slightest brush of skin or scale, sent her nervous system into complete overdrive. Imagine someone taking every nerve ending in your body and plugging it directly into a power generator, then cranking that generator up to maximum output. The Scythian military had tried everything. Specialized armor with haptic dampeners, neural suppressors, even experimental gene therapy that nearly killed her twice. Nothing worked, and honestly, most of it made things worse. But Kae'vira was brilliant, a tactical genius, whose strategic assessments had saved countless lives, so the Imperium kept her on, accommodating her condition the best they could. Which is to say, not particularly well, but better than letting her considerable talents go to waste. The problem started during a routine engagement near the Theta 7 relay station. Kae'vira's unit encountered a Zalnoth splinter group. Things went sideways as they tend to do in war, and she took a direct hit from what we call a resonance cannon. Basically, it's a weapon that turns your skeleton into a very enthusiastic tuning fork. Her armor, that beautiful, expensive, custom-made technological marvel that had cost the Imperium approximately the GDP of a small moon, was cracked along the left shoulder joint. Not destroyed, not obliterated, just a hairline fracture in the haptic dampening layer that meant any contact with that section would send her into shock. She couldn't take the armor off because we were still in combat conditions. She couldn't repair it herself because Scythian arms don't bend that way anatomically, and she absolutely could not let anyone touch her to fix it because, well, that would literally break her brain. So she did what any rational, terrified person would do. She locked herself in a supply closet and tried very, very hard not to have a complete psychological breakdown. Enter Officer Miles Cardozo. Miles was human, which should tell you everything and nothing simultaneously. Medium height by human standards, with dark hair that perpetually looked like he'd just rolled out of bed, warm brown eyes that crinkled when he smiled, and an absolutely infuriating habit of being exactly where he was needed without anyone asking him to be there. He was part of the Coalition's human contingent, one of those odd souls who'd volunteered for xeno-species integration training, and actually seemed to enjoy being surrounded by aliens who found his species simultaneously fascinating and deeply concerning. The humans had joined the Coalition about 5 cycles ago, and we were still figuring out what to make of them. On paper, they were weak. No natural armor, no enhanced healing, no specialized environmental adaptations, sensory capabilities that barely registered compared to most sentient species. But they had this quality, this absolutely maddening characteristic that defied all rational analysis. They cared, not in the abstract, philosophical way that civilized species care about the welfare of others, but in an immediate, personal, I will literally throw myself into harm's way for someone I met 5 minutes ago kind of caring that made military strategists across the galaxy very, very nervous. Miles found Kae'vira by following the trail of distressed color shifts she'd left in her scales, tiny flakes that had shed during her panicked retreat, each one broadcasting her terror in wavelength most species couldn't perceive, but humans somehow could approximate through context clues. He knocked on the supply closet door, which was adorable considering Kae'vira could hear his cardiovascular system functioning from inside. "Hey," he said, voice soft, undemanding. "I'm guessing you're having a rough time in there." Kae'vira's response was a hiss that translated roughly to an anatomically improbable suggestion involving Miles, his ancestors, and a collapsing star. Ssythian is not a gentle language when one is stressed. Miles just laughed, actually laughed. This warm, genuine sound that somehow didn't feel mocking. "Fair enough. That's fair. I probably deserve that. But listen, I noticed your armor's damaged, and I'm pretty good with Coalition tech. I've worked on Scythian equipment before, helped Ensign Velthar with his gauntlets last month. I could fix it for you if you'd like." "Don't touch me." The words came through the door synthesized by Kae'vira's translator, each one clipped and sharp as broken glass. "I won't," Miles said simply. "I promise, I won't touch you. Not your skin, not your scales, not even close. I'll fix the armor, just the armor. You have my word." Now, here's where it gets interesting. From a xenosociological perspective, Scythians don't really do trust, not in the way humans understand it. Their society is built on contracts, obligations, hierarchies, formal structures that define every interaction. The concept of taking someone at their word, especially an alien, someone from a species you barely know, was so foreign to Kae'vira's worldview that it actually short-circuited her panic for a moment. She opened the door. Miles stepped back immediately, hands raised, giving her space. Smart. He'd done his homework, understood the physical boundaries. "Okay," he said, "I'm going to need you to stay very still, and I'm going to move very slowly. I'll narrate everything I'm doing. If at any point you need me to stop, just say the word, and I'll stop. No questions, no judgment." Kae'vira's scales flickered uncertainly. Gray shot through with threads of pale green that indicated confusion mixed with desperate hope. She nodded. A gesture she'd learned from humans because her own species communicated assent through color patterns. What happened next took approximately 47 minutes, though I've watched the security footage at least a dozen times and it still feels somehow longer and shorter, simultaneously. Miles worked on that armor with a level of precision and care I've rarely seen outside of surgical theaters. He used specialized tools, some Coalition issue and some he'd apparently fabricated himself, keeping a running commentary the entire time. "Okay, I'm removing the outer panel now. There's some debris caught in the threading. I'm clearing it out, accessing the dampening layer. Looks like a clean break. That's good news." His hands never once touched Kae'vira's scales. He came close, millimeters away at points, but never made contact. When he needed to work on a particularly difficult section, he'd use these tiny, precise laser tools that let him operate from a few centimeters distance. When loose pieces threatened to fall and potentially brush her skin, he'd use magnetic fields to catch them mid-air. But here's the thing that gets me, the detail that I keep coming back to. It wasn't just the technical skill, though that was impressive enough. It was the way Miles talked to her throughout the entire process. Not about the repair, necessarily, but about everything else. He told her about growing up in a place called Albuquerque, which apparently is a city on Earth named after a complicated historical figure and means white oak, in a language that isn't even used anymore. How he'd always wanted to go to space but never imagined he'd end up fixing alien armor in a supply closet during an active war. How his sister Lucia had sent him a care package last month that included something called green chile, which he swore was the greatest culinary achievement in human history. Never mind that it was technically just a plant with capsaicin. And Kae'vira, terrified, traumatized Kae'vira, started to talk back. Carefully at first, single-word responses, then gradually more. She told him about the Scythian homeworld, about cities that grew from living coral structures on vast shallow seas, about the first time she'd experienced space travel and felt simultaneously exhilarated and betrayed because the stars looked nothing like they did in the myths. She talked about her condition, how it had started after an accident during her first military deployment, something she'd never discussed with anyone in her chain of command, a vulnerability she'd hidden for cycles behind formal reports and efficient competence. Miles didn't offer platitudes or empty reassurances. He just listened, occasionally asking questions, making these small sounds of acknowledgement that weren't quite words, but communicated understanding nonetheless. And his hands kept working, steady, patient, never rushing, despite the fact that we were still technically in a combat zone and could be called to battle stations at any moment. When he finally finished, when the armor was sealed, tested, fully functional, Kae'vira's scales had shifted to a color I'd never seen in any Ssythian before. A warm amber threaded through with soft gold, a pattern that usually indicated familial affection but here seemed to mean something adjacent, something that didn't quite have a name in Scythian or Standard Common. "Thank you," she said, and her voice had lost that sharp, defensive edge. She sounded tired, but also somehow lighter, like Miles had fixed more than just her armor. "Anytime," Miles said, "and I swear by the quantum foam," he meant it. "Seriously, if something else breaks, you know where to find me. I'll be the human probably doing something inadvisable in engineering." Kae'vira made a sound that her species used to indicate amused exasperation. "You're all inadvisable." "Yeah," Miles agreed cheerfully. "We really are. So that should have been the end of it, right? Touching moment. Problem solved. Everyone goes back to their respective duties, and the war continues its merry way toward either victory or spectacular obliteration. Except, and I cannot stress this enough, nothing involving humans ever stays neatly contained in its designated narrative box. Over the next few weeks, something shifted aboard the Verity's Edge. Kae'vira started showing up in engineering, not because her armor needed repairs, but because she'd apparently decided Miles needed supervision. She'd stand there, scales cycling through analytical blues and teals, watching him work on various bits of Coalition technology while offering tactical assessments of his repair methods. "You're approaching the plasma relay from the wrong angle. If the Xel'Nath hit us there, you'll need faster access. Or that tool is inefficient. Scythian engineering developed a better version 3 cycles ago. I'll get you the specifications." Miles would just grin at her, grease smeared across his cheek, and say something ridiculous like, "You know, for someone who claims to be here purely for quality control purposes, you sure do bring me coffee, sorry, that horrible Scythian acid beverage you people drink pretty regularly. It's called Velka, and I bring it because watching you mainline human caffeine is causing our medic officer literal distress." Kae'vira would shoot back, but her scales would shimmer with those gold undertones that meant she was pleased. The rest of the crew noticed, obviously. You can't have a Scythian officer and a human Texian developing what the humans call a friendship without it becoming immediate gossip fuel. The Kreval delegation thought it was a strategic alliance. The Phocian observers believed it was some form of honor-debt ritual. And the other humans just looked smug in that insufferable way humans get when they think they've figured something out before everyone else. But here's what made it remarkable from my professional perspective. Kae'vira was changing. Not dramatically, not in ways most people would even notice, but in small, significant increments. She started attending group briefings in person instead of via HoloLink. She'd position herself near Miles during these meetings. Not touching, never touching, but close enough that they could exchange those quick, silent communications that people who understand each other develop. When Lieutenant Torvin, a Vraxian with absolutely no sense of personal space, accidentally bumped into her during a tactical simulation, she froze but didn't flee, didn't shut down. Miles was across the room, caught her eye, made some subtle gesture that I later learned meant "You're okay, I'm here," and Kae'vira breathed, centered herself, continued with the simulation. The real test came during the Battle of Epsilon Reach, and yes, we're calling it a battle now because catastrophic multi-layered disaster doesn't look good in the official records. The Xel'Nath had figured out our defensive patterns, which should have been impossible given that we changed them every 48 hours, But those mineral bastards apparently had some kind of hive processing that could predict pattern evolution. They hit us hard, hitting the Verity's edge directly, and the ship's superstructure took damage in 17 critical sections simultaneously. Engineering became absolute chaos, alarms screaming, systems failing, crew members running in every direction with that particular brand of organized panic that happens when trained professionals encounter problems they weren't trained for. A plasma conduit ruptured in Section 7, flooding the area with radiation, and 3 crew members were trapped behind a sealed bulkhead, including, because the universe has a twisted sense of narrative irony, Kae'vira was on the bridge when it happened. I watched her scales go through about 15 colors in as many seconds, shock white to fear gray to anger, red to this determined purple. I'd never seen on her before. She was moving before anyone could issue orders, heading toward engineering at a speed that would have been impressive even if she weren't navigating through damaged corridors filled with debris and panicking crew members. Commander Thaxlar, our Vraxian second officer who had approximately 0 patience for emotional decision-making, tried to stop her. "Lieutenant, that section is irradiated. You'll need full hazard gear and a decontamination team." "Then get them," Kae'vira snapped, not slowing down. "But I'm not waiting." She grabbed a hazard suit, the kind with full environmental sealing and reinforced plating, and here's where it gets complicated. Hazard suits require assisted dressing protocols for most species, because they're designed to be absolutely airtight, which means someone else has to seal the joints and verify the connections. For Kae'vira, this meant someone would have to touch her, would have to run their hands over the suit's surface to check for gaps, would have to be in direct physical contact while helping her into something that could save her life. Ensign Yara, a human woman with copper-colored hair and a practical attitude toward impossible situations, stepped forward without being asked. "I'll help," she said simply. "I'll be gentle, I'll warn you before every touch, and I'll be as quick as possible. But Miles is my friend too, and you're going to need this suit sealed properly or you won't make it past the radiation barrier." Kae'vira stood there for maybe 3 seconds, which, when you're in an emergency situation, feels like approximately 3 years, and then she nodded. "Do it." Yara worked with the same careful efficiency Miles had shown, narrating every movement, giving Kae'vira time to prepare mentally for each contact. And Kae'vira endured. Her scales cycled through pain shades, whites and grays, and these awful pale yellows, but she held steady, breathing in controlled patterns that the humans teach for managing panic responses. When Yara sealed the final connection, her hands pressing firmly against Kae'vira's shoulders to test the joint integrity, Kae'vira made a sound like escaping steam but didn't pull away. "You're good," Yara said, stepping back immediately. "Go get our boy." Kae'vira went. The radiation levels in Section 7 would have killed most species within minutes. But Ssythian biology has certain advantages when it comes to energy absorption. Their scales can temporarily convert certain radiation types into stored energy, though it's agonizingly painful and can cause permanent damage if sustained too long. Kae'vira pushed through, cutting through the sealed bulkhead with a plasma torch, working methodically, despite her scales starting to show burn patterns from radiation exposure. She found Miles trying to keep 2 other crew members, a Phosian engineer named Quix and a young human, Tyler something, barely out of training, calm and alive. He'd rigged a makeshift radiation shelter using equipment panels and was manually operating a life support system that should have been automated, which meant he'd been standing there for almost 20 minutes keeping 2 other people breathing, while probably wondering if anyone was coming for them. When he saw Kae'vira through the bulkhead opening, his face did this complicated thing, where relief and concern mixed together in an expression that probably looked nonsensical to non-humans, but which Kae'vira seemed to understand perfectly. "Little overkill on the dramatic rescue, don't you think?" Miles called out, because humans apparently process mortal danger through humor. "I had everything under control. You're standing in lethal radiation without proper shielding. Manually operating systems that require 3 hands when you only have 2, and you look like you're about to collapse." Kae'vira shot back, her voice crackling through the suit's comm system. "Yes, very controlled." Getting everyone out took coordination and a kind of trust that doesn't develop overnight. Kae'vira had to physically guide Miles and the others through the damaged sections, which meant touching actual contact, even through the hazard suit. She'd press her suited hand against Miles's shoulder to steer him left, would grab Tyler's arm to keep him from stumbling over debris, would steady Quicks when his three-legged gait couldn't navigate the uneven flooring. Every touch was visible agony for her. I saw the footage later, watched her scales literally flicker between colors, so quickly they became almost white noise. But she didn't stop. She brought all three of them out alive, delivered them to medical, and then she collapsed. The medical team said she'd absorbed enough radiation to kill most Scythians twice over. Plus, she densely cooked her own nervous system by forcing herself through repeated physical contact while in acute stress conditions. They put her in a medical pod, one of those fancy isolation chambers that handles healing while preventing external stimuli, and told us she'd need at least 2 weeks of intensive care. Miles, who'd been treated for minor radiation exposure and exhaustion, refused to leave medical bay. He pulled up a chair outside Kae'vira's isolation chamber and just sat there. Didn't try to talk to her, didn't make a fuss, just maintained this quiet presence. When the medical staff suggested he should rest in his own quarters, he looked at them with this patient stubbornness and said, "I made her a promise that I'd be here if she needed me. Didn't specify any particular location for here, but I'm thinking this works." They let him stay, mostly because arguing with humans about loyalty matters is like arguing with a star about fusion. You're not going to change the fundamental process, you're just going to waste everyone's time. Kae'vira woke up on the 4th day. First thing she did, according to the medical logs, was ask where Miles was. Second thing she did was try to get out of the pod before she was cleared, which caused about 6 alarms to go off simultaneously and brought Miles rushing from whatever brief absence he'd taken for basic biological necessities. Hey, calm down," he said, positioning himself where she could see him through the pod's transparent panel. "You're okay, you're safe, everyone made it out. Tyler's already back on duty, telling everyone about how you cut through solid bulkhead like it was decorative foil. Quicks is composing some kind of Phosian gratitude poem that I'm told will take approximately 3 months to perform in its entirety, and I'm right here." Kae'vira's scales settled into that warm amber gold pattern. Her voice came through the pod speakers, weak but clear. "You made me talk to you while you fixed my armor. Tell me something now." So Miles talked. He told her about Lucia's latest message. Apparently she'd gotten engaged to someone who, and I quote, "actually appreciates the nuanced complexity of properly roasted chili peppers," and about the experimental engine modifications that Chief Engineer Kalaseth was pretending not to know he was working on, and about how the human crew had started a completely unauthorized betting pool about whether Kae'vira would accept a formal commendation for the rescue, because apparently humans will gamble on literally anything. And Kae'vira listened, and something in her relaxed, not her condition, which was still very much present and very much permanent, but something deeper. The fear that her limitations defined her worth, that her inability to tolerate touch made her less capable, less valuable, less worthy of connection. When she was finally cleared from medical 3 weeks later, she found Miles in engineering working on someone's personal datapad fixing it. Naturally, because humans can't resist fixing things. She stood there for a moment, just watching, and then she did something that made every species in the bay stop what they were doing. She walked up behind him, raised her hand, and very carefully, very deliberately, placed 2 fingers on his shoulder. The touch lasted maybe 3 seconds. Miles went absolutely still, understanding the significance, not wanting to accidentally ruin the moment. Kae'vira's scales flickered through what looked like pain patterns, but also determination, gratitude, affection, colors that shouldn't coexist, but somehow did. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for fixing my armor, for everything." Miles turned slowly, carefully maintaining exactly the distance she'd established. His eyes were suspiciously bright, and he was smiling in that particular way humans smile when they're trying really hard not to cry. "Anytime," he said. "Literally, genuinely, anytime." And here's the thing about humans that still fascinates me. that still makes absolutely no logical sense but somehow works anyway. They don't fix people. They don't cure conditions or erase trauma, or magically make disabilities disappear. But they show up, they stay present, and they create spaces where healing, whatever healing looks like for each individual, becomes possible. Kae'vira never became comfortable with touch, not really. Her haphephobia remained a fundamental part of who she was, but she learned to exist in a universe where people cared about her anyway, where her boundaries were respected without making her feel broken, where friendship didn't require her to be anyone other than exactly who she was. And Miles. Miles just kept being Miles, fixing things, making terrible jokes, showing up exactly when needed because that's what humans do. They're infuriating and illogical and emotionally reckless, and somehow, impossibly, exactly what the rest of us need. The war with the Xel'Nath ended eventually. We won. Though "won" is a complicated term when you're counting casualties in the millions, and the coalition forces dispersed. Kae'vira accepted a strategic position on the Ssythian High Command. Miles got recruited for some classified human project involving experimental spacecraft that will probably either revolutionize interstellar travel or accidentally create a black hole. They still send messages, though. Regular, rambling communications about absolutely nothing important. Repairs and family updates and complaints about military bureaucracy. And maybe that's the real story here. Not the dramatic rescue, or the fixed armor or any single moment of connection, but the ongoing choice to maintain it, to keep showing up for each other across whatever distance or difference exists between them. Because in the end, that's the most human thing of all. The stubborn, illogical, beautiful insistence that connection matters, that caring is worth the effort. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply be gentle with someone who needs gentleness. And honestly, from a xenosociological perspective, that's absolutely terrifying and completely magnificent in equal measure.